This is a picture of John in his home and studio. He's going to talk about that as well. So let me talk about John himself. John is the great-grandson of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who was the first cousin of William K. Vanderbilt Jr., Willie K. So here we are, we've talked about the Vanderbilt Cup races for all these years. Now we're going to talk to a relative of Willie K. himself. He's an author, he's a pundit, he's a political columnist, he's a former U.S. Congressman, and he's a very big baseball fan, where I consider John a friend of mine, and for the last 4 years we've been going to the Yankee-Met game, right? And the Mets always won until this year, too. But here we are. Here we are at the July 5th Met game there. I have the Met flag with a polar bear on the top of it. And there's John, he's wearing the Yankee hat. He's a big Yankee fan. And here I am rooting for the Mets, too. And during the game, John got a ball. That line drive really hurt your hand, right there, John?
When I picked it up off the ground.
You picked it off the ground. But we gave it to a Yankee child there, right? A kid over there, and he was absolutely thrilled.
Good guy.
Yeah, it was good. So with that, let's hear from John LeBoutilier, who's...
Thank you, Howard. Howard is such a wonderful man, as is Roz a wonderful woman. And the thing about Howard that we share is, yeah, we love baseball, but we love history, we love Long Island, we love the history of Long Island, and particularly Mr. Vanderbilt. And when we were preparing this, and I looked at the dates, so Gertrude is his first cousin. Their fathers were brothers. So there was Cornelius Vanderbilt II, that's Gertrude's father, and his brother was William Kissam Vanderbilt I, the father of Willie K. And they're brothers, and they each have a bunch of kids. And Gertrude, 3 years older. She's born in 1875. She would die in New York Hospital in 1942, 2 years before him. These people were young. Gertrude died at 67 years old. Teddy Roosevelt died at 62 years old, having been a New York State Assemblyman, police commissioner, governor, vice president, president, author, naturalist, all that. Did very much the same stuff that Willie K. did in natural science. And all that, and he's dead at 62. You know, we're all older than that, and it's amazing, you know, how life has changed.
He was an underachiever.
He was an underachiever, yeah. And so I have told Howard that my grandmother, this is Gertrude's daughter, and my mother knew Mr. Vanderbilt. And I can remember my mother saying how much she loved him. She thought this guy was like a superstar. Boats, cars, natural science, all of it. They really looked up to him. And there are many people in this family who are extremely accomplished in many different fields, and very proud of them and being related to them, and he in particular. And Gertrude, his first cousin, and now his sister, a few of us were talking before everybody got here. How many of you all are watching the Gilded Age? So about half of us, yeah. And it's fantastic, and is very much based on these folks, parts of it. And Gertrude is not in the Gilded Age so far. I'm hoping that she will make an appearance in a future season, because Gertrude, as Willie K. was off doing things that were not normal. In other words, to be a natural scientist, to pioneer car racing. This is the stuff of people with real courage and intellect to learn new things and do new things. Not just to have money and have parties. They wanted to do something with their lives. So he did that, and Gertrude had a thing about being an artist. She wanted to create art. Women were not being artists and not being commercial artists, and it was frowned upon. Her own mother did not want her to do it, but she had this hankering to be a sculptress and a writer too. And so she set out to do it. It caused, I think, conflict in her life. And then, of course, she meets her future husband. And this, if you go to the Gilded Age, for those of us who've seen it, Christine Baranski's character, Agnes Van Ryn, right? She's unbelievable in this show. The most opinionated, prejudiced, I mean, it's unbelievable. But the thing she's prejudiced about is not anti a type of person. It's the gap between new and old, which means new money and old money. And believe it or not, the Vanderbilts were new money. And they were the most fabulously rich people in American history at the time. The railroad fortune was gigantic and just printed money. And they were considered new money. Mrs. Van Ryn wouldn't dig the Vanderbilts. She also wouldn't know what that term dig meant. But she wouldn't have liked them. And so Gertrude's a Vanderbilt, obviously, but she marries Harry Payne Whitney of the Whitney family, which is the old money. And ironically, the Vanderbilts built the New York Penn Central Railroad, which is the dominant railroad. And the Whitneys, William C. Whitney, Gertrude's father-in-law, who would be my great-great-grandfather, he built the subway, his company, built the subway system of New York City. So everything was trains, subways, all that stuff. Then we get into cars, and by 1925 or 6, Gertrude's son, who you've all read about over the years, haven't maybe realized it, this guy, Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, known as Sonny Whitney. And you've all read about his last wife, Mary Lou, who was in all the columns for decades. Well, when he was a younger guy, he was one of the original investors in Pan American Airways. And he was smart about it. He knew that the Vanderbilts started out, what did Commodore Vanderbilt make his first of 3 fortunes in? First was furs in Canada, transporting furs from Canada. Then steamships in New York Harbor, that's fortune number 2. And then, boom, into the railroads. And off we go, the Vanderbilts dominated the railroads. And his 2 grandsons that I mentioned, Cornelius and Willie Kay, ran the New York Penn Central. They built Grand Central Station. And it's interesting, in the Gilded Age, there's this fight that George Russell has with some, he calls them aldermen. Now, I haven't gone back to look in the 1880s. If New York, I mean, now it's a city council. I don't know, maybe they were called aldermen back then, I don't know. But remember, there was this sort of bribery going on to get them to agree to build what would be Grand Central. And they agree to it, sell stock, make money, then they back out, and he gets furious over this, and he ruins some people over it in the Gilded Age. But these 2 brothers, Willie Kay's father, called William Kisson Vanderbilt, and Cornelius Vanderbilt II, they built Grand Central. And they are doing great and printing money. And their offspring are who we're talking about. Willie Kay, that you love, and I love, and Gertrude. And Gertrude did many things. She was an artist. She was a mother of 3 kids and a wife, obviously. And then comes the thing about her that I'm most proud of that should be a TV series. So get this. She has a studio in New York, the studio that I live in on Long Island, the studio in Newport, studio in Paris, and a studio in Havana, Cuba. And she travels around every year working in these studios, making sculptures, doing commissions and all, and having a great life. And she's home here in August 1914 when what happens? World War I begins. We're not in it yet, but it begins, and she's here and says to someone, I love the French, I don't know what to do, what should I do? And someone said, well, write out a check. So she was very rich. She was a Vanderbilt, married to the Whitneys. You could say she was the richest woman in the world, probably. She writes out a big check to the Ambulance Corps, which was different than the Red Cross, but sort of the same. And she gave this money to them. And then after a few weeks, she said, I'm not satisfied. I might skip ahead, but we don't really need slides. But that's Gertrude, done by John Singer Sargent, who is portrayed in the Gilded Age painting Gladys Russell, almost like this. They've got Gladys sitting up, and this is Gertrude reclining on this thing. And this is the studio where she started working in Long Island, mid-19-teens, say. But before I get to that, I've got to tell the thing I'm most proud about Gertrude, and we all should, and it should end up in the Gilded Age. So, she's not happy. She gave this money, the war's going on, she said, I'm not satisfied. So here's what she does. She goes to Roosevelt Hospital, and she goes to the board of directors, gives them an idea, they agree to it. She then goes through the hospital, interviewing doctors, surgeons, nurses. And when she's finished with this little project, she has hired, I believe, 12 surgeons and 24 nurses out of her pocket, takes them over to the west side to Cunard, and they all get on a ship and head across the ocean. They get to France, they motorcade up to the front, which is France and Belgium. They get up there, they're near the front, and she looks around and she gets some people to help her, and they find an abandoned boys' school. She buys it. And immediately they renovate it while they're all there, and they set up a field hospital. And she is now nursing in the hospital, running the hospital, paying for the hospital, bringing more doctors and nurses over, and is aghast at what she sees with these poor French soldiers coming in with their legs blown off, mustard gas. I mean, the whole thing was terrible. And the parents of these boys would come in looking for their son, and a lot of times they'd have the poor son there in terrible shape, and then they'd say, where's our other son? He hasn't been found yet, he's still out there. And this affected her greatly. And so here is this hugely rich American woman building and running and financing a hospital in a war zone in another country, and she did it through the war. She came back here mostly, but kept running it from afar. And I think that is a great story and a wonderful example of someone using this enormous wealth, which she did not create, to do good, as did Willie Kay. He's not sitting there drinking it up. He's doing something that was new and pushing it. This is the studio from a drone, and I live there. It's a fantastic. And my mother said to me, we're going to get it and restore it the way it used to be. Anybody take Latin in school? What does cave mean? C-A-V-E. This is at the front door. C-A-V-E. Means beware. So beware the dog. And that's the ceiling, and this is the living room. And fantastic portrait of Mike. We advance things a little fast, but that's okay. So here, this is the studio. This is the porch. That's Gertrude around 1938. Always very stylish with her. They all smoked all the time. And she's smoking with a cigarette holder usually. Very elegant looking. By the way, I was thinking of something about the Gilded Age. So, what's so cool about the show, you know? You've got these two rich families, the Russells on one side of the street, and the Van Ryns on the other side. Very well done, right? And half the story's about them, and half the story is about their staffs downstairs. upstairs, downstairs. But no one has little kids in this show, so they don't show what my mother told me about growing up in that lifestyle. And here's how my mother grew up. Every kid had a governess. My mother had a French governess named Sis. And Sis spent all day with little Pam, my mother. And then around 5 o'clock or 4:30 in the afternoon, Sis would get Pam dressed up for her 15 minutes with her parents in the living room. Yeah, and in they went and show off, and the parents were about ready to start drinking. Oh, little Pam, little Buzzer, nice to see you, how's things? And then they're out of there. They never saw their parents. This is not in the Gilded Age, because there are no little kids, but that's what went on. By the way, I would hate to have Bertha Russell as my mother. Here's Gertrude, the most stylish woman. The clothes were great. That's her. She always had a dog. And there she, look at that outfit.
Wow.
And this one was in Paris at a party, made from a costume from the Ballet Russe in Paris, and she wore this pantsuit thing to a big ball over there. And she was always sort of ahead of her times in things. Here she is sculpting. This is when she's pretty young, 1913. So she's got her 3 kids, but she's back working full time. And she had commissions all over the world, you know. But her big breakthrough was the Titanic. So the Titanic goes down April 13 or 12, 1912. And it's an incredible disaster, and America reels from it. And finally, Mrs. Helen Taft, the First Lady, says we're gonna have a contest to build a memorial to the Titanic. And it's gonna be called the Women's Titanic Memorial. And she asked women across America to send $1 in to pay for this thing, and they did. And that's probably like $10 today, but people sent in a lot of money, and they had a contest, and people submitted what they thought it should look like, and Gertrude won the commission. And that elevated her into international status, and she built the statue that did not actually get installed until, I think, 1932. And it's on the Potomac River, and it's still there today, and it's very cool. So here she is working, hard-working. Here's the famous case, another chapter of her life. And I've sort of gotten to know it from the other end. So here's Gertrude and her niece, Gloria Vanderbilt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she goes to court because her drunken brother fathered this girl, and with a girl named Gloria Morgan. And when her brother died, Gloria Morgan had custody of little Gloria. They called her Little Gloria because the mother's called Gloria, and it's confusing. So little Gloria has a mother who's off sleeping with other men, going to Europe, paying no attention to this kid. And Gertrude sees this as the aunt and says, this just isn't right. And she goes to court, high publicity, trying to take custody of a little girl away from the girl's mother, and wins the case. And gets Gloria to live in the house in Old Westbury. So this is my great-grandmother. My grandmother, Flora, is the same age as her. So really it was my grandmother who was with Gloria all the time. And my mother was around, and she remembers all of it, and always got along well with Gloria, but this girl was never right. She was heavily damaged by her upbringing as a young girl. And I got along well with her. And she had a bunch of kids by different men, and of course Anderson Cooper is the famous one. But she had a few others. She has a boy that lives out here on the East End named Stan Stokowski, who's this son of Gloria and Leopold Stokowski, the conductor.
Wow.
People never talk about him. And of course, Anderson's older brother, who was a friend of mine, Carter Cooper, who fell off a balcony at Gracie Square. And we don't really know how all that happened. He was a wonderful kid. And it was a hell of a funeral. And my mother and I get into the pew in the row in the church, and we look down sort of where you are, and there comes Nancy Reagan sitting 5 feet away from us. But we see her in profile, and my mother says, "Whoa, now I know where the drive in the Reagan family comes from." When you saw Nancy from the side, her chin came out to about here. I mean, this was a determined chin. And she was a good friend of Gloria. Excuse me?
Very determined woman.
Very, yeah. So here is Gloria, and that's Anderson.
Wow.
And although I don't think it is, I think that's Carter, but I'm not sure. And I told this story when Lauren Bacall died, that in 1982, Gloria calls my mother up and says, "I'm having a party out here in Southampton for Claudette Colbert, the actress. How would you and John like to come to this party?" So my mother says, "Would I take her out?" I go, "Yeah, we go out there. It's really nice, set up around a table. I mean, around the tables around the pool. And he's 14 years old. So this is like 1982. And a lot of people there. And we all get assigned seating, and I sit down at my table, and it's a round table with about 8 people there. Anderson is across the table from me. And I have on my right Lauren Bacall, the actress. So dinner begins, everybody's talking at our table, and somehow, I know, Anderson was a news junkie at 14. And it's the summer of 82. So I think that's the summer that Yasser Arafat and those guys are packed up and moved to Beirut, which of course would lead to the downfall of Beirut. But anyway, this was in the news as a big difference. Here we are 40 years later, and the same thing's going on. But this was going on right then. And so Anderson, 14, at a dinner for Claudette Colbert, at our table, he says, "You know, they really need to create an independent state for the Palestinians." Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? This woman goes crazy. And she tears 14-year-old Anderson to pieces at dinner. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this isn't right. First of all, he's a kid. He's the hostess's son, and he's trying to talk to adults about an adult topic. Not a kid like you and me talking about baseball. He's trying to talk about the Middle East, which is pretty damn good. She rips him apart. I mean, it was embarrassing. So when the meal was over, and everybody gets up and mills around, I'm so upset. I walk up to the house, and I go in, and I said to someone, I said, "That woman is a disaster." And someone says, "You don't like her? Well, you ought to see how much this guy hates her." And this guy was sitting on a bench, and it was Rex Reed, the movie critic. Right away he says, "I hate that bitch. Let's go down and throw her in the swimming pool." So I said, "Okay, great." So we get up and we start walking down, and I start thinking, you know, this isn't very smart. I'm running for re-election, and I'm going to throw Lauren Bacall in a swimming pool. What if we pull her arm out of the socket? So that never ended up happening. Anyway, that's Anderson, and here he is now, or closer now. In Cody, Wyoming, she built this huge statue. Here's Gertrude.
Beautiful.
Still there in Cody, there it is. Now, Huelva, Spain, big statue in the harbor there in Spain. This is more of the studio. Okay, you know, we don't need to do all this. It's a beautiful place. Now, here's going to be her last commission before she's going to die in 3 or 4 years. This is going to be for the 1939 World's Fair, and it's called The Spirit of Flight, and it has 3 wings and 2 people, and they're going to look like they fly, and it was huge, and she had 4 different statues on commission at the World's Fair in 1939, and there it is. And unfortunately, when they took down the World's Fair, no one knows what happened to this thing. I'm thinking it's in some guy's backyard in New Jersey. All right, here is the Titanic Memorial that I mentioned to you. This is the Potomac River, and it's great. Now, my uncle came up with something quite good.
Very impressive.
Yeah, it is, it's very good. And my uncle said, I'll tell you what happened. James Cameron, when he was researching to write and make the movie, the Titanic, he got this thing, got a picture of that. What does that look like to some of you? That's Leo DiCaprio on the bow of the Titanic going, I am the king of the world. And the idea of it is so insane, you know. Now, okay, so that's 1912, the Titanic. 3 years later, we're not in the war yet, 1915, the Lusitania leaves New York, heads over there. It's a passenger ship. On board is Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt, Gertrude's brother, and her favorite sibling, and a great guy. And Alfred, I can't believe I'm going to say this, he could not swim. They get 30 miles off the coast of Ireland, and a German U-boat puts a torpedo into the Lusitania, and instantly they know they're going down, and it's insane. These ships, like the Titanic, did not have enough lifeboats for all the people and crew on board, so you had to select women and children saved, men go down. Alfred Vanderbilt knew he was going to die, so he took his life vest off, put it on a woman who had a little baby, put him in a lifeboat, off they go, he dies. And that incident propelled us, finally, into World War I. And Gertrude really never got over that incident. She was really blown away by her brother dying. And Ireland, where the Lusitania had been built, they announced a contest to build a memorial to the Lusitania. And she makes this unbelievable mock-up that I have in my house, I don't have a picture here, of a lifeboat being held up by the dead souls of the ship. And in the lifeboat, the crew is holding their oars up, looking to God. And in the bow is the woman and the little baby that Alfred saved by giving him the life vest. Yeah, and I have that at home. So there again, World War I. We have the hospital, where she's running and working in the hospital. We have her brother Alfred dying. And then the third thing, and it's extremely Long Island. I think it was 1916. Gertrude's oldest child, my grandmother, Flora Whitney, meets Quentin Roosevelt at a party. This is Teddy Roosevelt's youngest son. And they go for each other quite quickly. Then former President Roosevelt does something that's a little different than today. We had very little armed forces back then. We're not in the war yet. He says to his 4 sons, you must take training to be ready for the war. So they're not in the service or anything, but they had camps around here to train people to be soldiers. And so Quentin, who's at Harvard, says, okay, I want to be a pilot, which is brand new. We didn't have pilots. Airplanes had just come. So he goes into a unit in Mineola at a field called Hazelhurst Field, and there are 8 guys in this unit getting trained to fly these pathetically flimsy little biplanes. And he becomes a pilot, And when he's not training, he's with my future grandmother, Flora, and they're madly in love, and he courts her. And things were much nicer then than they are now in relations between men and women. So here's what they used to do for a date. They'd go over to Sagamore Hill. And there were hammocks over there, and she'd get in a hammock, and next to her would be another hammock, and he'd be in there, and they're reading books. No looking at cell phones, no nothing except reading and developing your brain, right? One day, out marches from the house former President Roosevelt. Walks up to Quentin and Flora in the two hammocks and says, "Flora, what are you reading?" And she looks at her book and says, "Oh, I'm reading such and such. It's really great. You should read it." Okay, so a few days later, she's over there again on another date in the hammock reading. Out he comes, walks up to her, and he says, "Flora, I read that book you told me about. It's the worst damn book I ever read." And he would read 3 books a day. And everything, papers, and he was a dynamo. And he loved Quentin and heavily approved of this romance. Then we get in the war. And Quentin is shipped off to France, ultimately to be a pilot, but for his first year, he was the supply officer in his unit. And my grandmother, Flora, wants to go to Paris to be there near him. And there were some laws that prevented people from going into a war zone if they were related. It was all sorts of stuff. And her parents, Gertrude and Harry, behind the scenes, did everything they could to keep her from going over there. And I'm sure part of it was the Lusitania. How do you know if you get on a passenger ship, which should not have been sunk, but the Germans broke the law, international law, they broke it. They claimed, oh, there were munitions in the hold of the ship, but I doubt it. So anyway, she never saw Quentin again. He gets shot down by the Germans on the French-German border in this little biplane. And he goes down and dead. Plane crash, body ejected out of this little airplane. The German soldiers come up to this body, and he's wearing a World War I, tunic outfit with pockets. And a soldier opens up the tunic on his left pocket and pulls out a letter addressed to Lieutenant Quentin Roosevelt from my grandmother. That's how they knew they'd killed the son of the former president. This is huge news, rocketed around the world. It would be big news today if a former president's son were killed in a war. It would be a huge deal. And this was big news, and it devastated my grandmother, but it devastated Teddy. And Teddy would die within 6 months of that, in great part because of how sad he was over Quentin's death. And my grandmother, this is unbelievable. Teddy had a daughter named Edith Derby, and Dr. Derby was his son-in-law. He was a doctor and lived here, but he had a place in Dark Harbor, Maine. And so Teddy Roosevelt says to my grandmother after the funeral or the memorial service for Quentin, the body was buried in France. Teddy says, "We're going to go up to Maine. Flora, why don't you come with us?" So they go up there on a train, and they're on the island of Dark Harbor and sort of trying to get over this thing when there's a knock on the house, and it's a military messenger with a package of letters that were never sent by Quentin to Flora. They had them, he'd written them, but I guess the mailing wasn't great. And they found all this stuff after he died, packaged it up and shipped it over, and it finds its way up to Maine. And my poor future grandmother is sitting there reading messages from the love of her life who's dead. And she's reading them. I mean, I can't imagine. Well, guess what she does? She goes on the rebound and marries a very good-looking guy from that unit in Hazelhurst Field in Mineola, and marries him, and that was my grandfather, and named Roderick Tower. She didn't love him. She loved Quentin, but she tried to put that love into this man, who wasn't a bad guy or anything, and that marriage didn't work. Meanwhile, when the war comes to an end, you know what they do? They take Hazelhurst Field and name it Roosevelt Field.
Yeah.
So Howard and I had lunch today, we were talking about, everybody thinks Roosevelt Field is named after either Teddy or Franklin. Quentin Roosevelt. And apparently a wonderful guy. So, now the final thing that I want to mention. The war's over, we're in the mid-20s. The French government comes to Gertrude and commissions her to build a statue to honor I call them GIs, but in World War I, we called our army guys doughboys.
Right.
And unlike World War II, you've all seen the movies with the invasion of Normandy and the terrible beach invasions and death and all. France in World War I was divided. The Germans had part of it, but the French had the coast. So, we came over there under General Blackjack Pershing, and we went to the city of Saint-Nazaire. And in came the troop ships with hundreds of troops in uniform, all their equipment. They'd get off the ship, walk into the town, be welcomed by the French, thank you for coming, and then they go off into the interior and have terrible battles. But Saint-Nazaire was the place they landed, right? So the French government says to Gertrude after the war, we want you to build a statue to honor these American doughboys who came and saved our country. So she starts sketching what she would like to make. And then she builds what they call as a maquette, which is a small version. So it's a stone thing, an American eagle, a doughboy on top with a sword, sword a little bit made to look like a cross. As I noticed in a lot of her sculptures, which are 100 plus years ago, Christianity was a big deal. And she had the cross in many statues. Now, this is in her garden in Paris, another mock-up bigger. And you can, same thing. And then she has to, once it's okay, they go to a foundry and start building the real thing. And look at the size of, here's the torso, it's bigger than a man. Here's the legs. Now, this is 1926. We don't have the equipment that we're used to now. There's the lower part of the body. This is out in the harbor. It's gigantic. And there, look at the size of people compared to this thing. So it's in the harbor in Saint-Nazaire, and it goes up, like I said, 1926, and it's there, 20s, 30s, there it is. And last thing before we do questions.
Still
Now,
there? It's still there?
Well, it's there, but 1940, France is retaken, this time by the Nazis. And the first thing that happens, we're not in the war yet, first thing that happens when Hitler has taken Germany is Admiral Dönitz goes to Hitler. He says, I must have U-boat bases on the west coast of France. Now, I don't have a map here, but if you ever look at a map of France, we all know the French Riviera, we know where Normandy is up north, but there's a west coast of France that juts out into the Atlantic Ocean. And this guy, Admiral Dönitz, who's the head of the U-boats, he says, I gotta have these bases so that I can project the U-boats farther into the Atlantic and sink the American merchant marine ships that are bringing under Lend-Lease stuff to England and to Russia. And so they build these bases, Saint-Nazaire, Brest, and one other place there. How many of you have seen Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark? That was the first one. Okay, you've all seen it. And you remember in there, Indiana Jones gets on a U-boat, and the Ark, I guess, is on the U-boat, and the girl is on the U-boat, and next thing you know, it's going into this cave. And they're in the cave, and there's the Ark is being pulled along this mechanical thing, and Nazi flags. That's one of the U-boat bases that's still there, and they filmed it there. And those 3 bases are still there. But Admiral Dunitz goes to scout where he's going to build these U-boat bases, 1940. And they ultimately bring German engineers, German workers, and they could build great stuff. And it's still there. And when he gets there, he sees this thing. And he finds out this is an American soldier from World War I. Oh, guess who won World War I? Guess who lost World War I? Guess who was humiliated in World War I? Oh, and guess who was a prisoner of war held in England in World War I? Future Admiral Dunitz, who promised himself, if I ever get another shot, I'm not taking the Americans lightly. So, you know what that bastard does? He blows this thing up. Because it's a symbol of what's good.
Right.
These guys are good. America's good. And they blow it up, and it's in smithereens in the harbor. 1940. 1989, the people of Saint-Nazaire raise money and hire a local sculptor, and they fish it all out and put it together, and it's back up. Yeah, which is great. And I haven't been, but my uncle and some others have been over there, and when the people of Saint-Nazaire find out that a member of Gertrude's family's there, they go crazy. This means a lot to them. And I don't think it's true that the French are snooty to Americans. I think maybe they are in Paris, but they certainly aren't here. And I've met people from there who've come here who tell me this thing meant everything growing up in Saint-Nazaire, because it's a memory of what America could do to save Europe twice, by the way. So I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of Gertrude. I'm proud of the Vanderbilts. I'm proud of Howard and my friendship. I've talked too much. Let's take questions, Howard.
Here we go. Here.